Hello, YouTubers. Joe Kersey here on Sunday, March 16th, 2014 at 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern Time, Eastern Daylight Time. And, of course, today's Sunday, as I said, and that means I went to church. Now, today is the second Sunday in Lent, and the readings were first four verses of Genesis 12, the call of Abraham. That's very short and sweet. Then you have Psalm 121, I will lift up my eyes into the hill whence cometh my help. Always a good one. And then some bits, picking and choosing from bits of Romans 4 that dealt basically with, Abraham's status with God as, having faith before the law was even established and so forth. And then we get to John 3, first 17 verses. Because they couldn't be troubled with the rest of it. But it's basically, it's the visit of Nicodemus. Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night. Some translations say by night, others say in the dark. And they have this colloquy about Nicodemus is basically probing to see what Jesus is all about. And Jesus is trying to get Nicodemus to think about, the spiritual transformation of an encounter with the Holy Ghost and the possibility that he, Jesus, is the Son of God. He as much as tells him that, actually. And then you have the John 3:16 thing that you see plastered around football stadiums, which many people say encapsulates the central message of Christianity. And it does. I think, unfortunately, its widespread use in those venues has tended to trivialize it. My own favorite, one-verse summary of, what's essential to believe is Romans 10:9. So that was today's gospel. Now, Charles's sermon today was, I think sometimes he goes, he has a provocative idea and then he follows it to his logical conclusion, and that's fine. That's the academic way. I often found myself starting out writing a paper with a thesis, and then the logic of the internal logic of the argument then basically led me to just go back and rewrite the first paragraph because it was clear that I was concluding something quite different from what I had started out to try to say. This in no way meant that I actually agreed with that. Such is the, how should we say, mental malleability with which I have been blessed. I don't know if it's good or bad. It's served me well thus far. Um, so his idea was that he said, and this is an interesting point. He says whenever something happens in the dark in John, it means that that's dark as in like not necessarily good. Or Nicodemus was in the dark. Not only did he come to Jesus in the dark, but he was in the dark as far as what the truth of Jesus was all about. And so he discusses that encounter in John 3, and then he discusses, it wasn't, he did not have an encounter with Jesus in John 7 toward the end of that chapter, but he does say in the council, Charles described it as kind of a weasel thing. He says, we have a law, and we can't really say anything about this guy till we hear his testimony and so forth. And Charles says, well, he sort of was still in the dark, but he was, doing a CYA maneuver to, I think he was doing a CYA maneuver and vis-a-vis the Sanhedrin, rather than a CYA maneuver vis-a-vis the possibility. I think by that time he probably had a good idea. Charles would disagree with that, and much to my surprise, Charles then went on to say that when Nicodemus, and Joseph of Arimathea came to take Jesus' body, and anoint it and put it in the tomb. He said that happened in the dark. Well, no, clearly it didn't happen in the dark because, it happened before sundown. The idea was you wanted to get these guys off the cross before sundown on the Jewish, this was like a double whammy Passover. It was a Passover that occurred on a Saturday, at least in John's Gospel. Now in the others, it's more traditionally on anyway, it's that was how it reads in John's Gospel. But he said it came in the dark, and collected the body, and we've established that's not the case. And his other point was, he brought 100 pounds of 100 weight. Some translations have 100 weight, 100 pounds of spices, to anoint this body. And he says, well, he wanted to really weight Jesus' body down so as to be sure he doesn't rise up again. Now, he said he still wasn't getting it. And I would say he did get it. He did get it finally. If he hadn't gotten it by chapter 7, he certainly got it after the crucifixion. And so it's interesting, though. Charles had an idea and he ran with it, and propounded it. And I can't say I agree with it, but it was an interesting sermon. And I'm using the word interesting in its real sense, not the that's interesting. Yeah. As this is often the case when somebody says, oh, that's interesting. Along the line of what was interesting, we had our adult sort of discussion, Lenten discussion session after I went to the 8 o'clock service, after this service, and excuse me, one of who I'd always sort of considered to be one of the more orthodox, believers in our congregation was sitting next to me, and she says, well, it's, Christianity now. I want to try to get this right. Christianity now, she says, is so much more than simply believing Jesus Christ is the Son of God and died for our sins and was resurrected. She says, you don't even necessarily have to believe that to be a Christian. And it's like, what? I mean, I didn't say anything, but apparently, of course, my face was doing probably a many-fold more amazed look than you're seeing right now. We were looking out, parallel to each other, so she didn't see my face necessarily, and I had the sense to sort of turn away a bit. But meanwhile, this woman on the other side of the room, saw this, and she broke up. She started laughing and covering her mouth. And she immediately got up and came over and sat next to me. And I said, I gotta, I just can't control my face sometimes. In fact, she says, oh, I love your face. I said, I can't control that sometimes. So, it's a forum in which all sorts of ideas are exchanged and propounded, which is nice because, it's very civilized. It's not, it's not one of these, in your face, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, tight, yelling exchanges that passes for, commentary nowadays. It was a civilized exchange, Everybody had their say, then there was some, criticism in the real sense of the word criticism, which is, meaning evaluative statements rather than, that sort of stuff. And so it was nice to have a very civilized exchange. The real topic of today's discussion was supposed to be the Last Supper as detailed in Mark. But we did cover that. I mean, it's the standard received view is that Mark was the first gospel written. Although there are some folks that say Matthew may have predated Mark. A fellow named Theed and I think, well, this is Eyewitness to Jesus, amazing new manuscript evidence about the origin of the Gospels by, let's see here, Karsten Peter Theed and Matthew D'Ancona. Its thesis is that Matthew was written first, and they base that on, technical analysis of the various papyrus fragments, the earliest, papyrus fragments of Matthew. And, of course, anybody saying something like that has to overcome this whole business about this postulated proto-gospel Q. Q standing for a German word, I think meaning source. And, some people say they found fragments of Q. Others have tried to put together something called Q, based from internal linguistic analysis of the certainly the four canonical Gospels, as well as some of the particularly the Gospel of Thomas, which is more of a sayings gospel that's not all that inconsistent with the synoptics, although it was obviously written much later. It's one of the Gnostic Gospels. So, but it's probably the least Gnostic of the Gnostic Gospels. So we had that discussion. It's interesting. How many times have we read the accounts of the Last Supper? Certainly every year. Sometimes multiple times. Sometimes you read all of them every year as part of the Holy Week, and it's one of these things that you go through them all so often that you think you know them, and then but when you go through them really slowly and have somebody that's sort of a professional in this, who likes to toss out provocative questions, for good or ill, it generates you taking a fresh look at some stuff. I noticed a couple, three things that I'd never noticed before in this account. Chief among them, very trivially, there were more than 13 people in that room. It's very clear from the internal evidence of the discussion. It says, it says one of the 12 eating with me will betray me. It says, they began to say, "Is it I? Is it I?" That could have been even some bystanders. There's, it certainly can be implied. Well, it can certainly be inferred that Mark implies that there were more than just the 13 people in that upper room. Well-furnished upper room. Make ready there in the Passover. So it was a good session this morning, and then by the grace of God, got home safely, and the house was safe, and it's still like it's 22 degrees. When they said the high of 35 today, I think that was a midnight high. Nonetheless, I'm sitting here in my shorts. Well, I'm sitting here in I've got my M80, Army surplus liner on, but sitting here in my shorts. Well, that's about it. That's I read next Sunday, so it's the waters. I got to read the waters of Meribah there from Exodus 17. So that's always a good tale, good yarn, and so our rector's off for 2 weeks in sunny Florida with his kids for spring break. GTFOOD. That's get the out of Dodge. We used to say that at the end of various cases. Off to the recovery room. GTFOD. Alrighty, I'm going to settle down now and say bye-bye, YouTubers.